In the last segment of Lecture 4, we moved into the system of mood. Our path into the system of mood was through a consideration of the principle of unmarked theme in English, unmarked topical theme, plus possibly a preceding interpersonal theme. And we saw that the principle of unmarked theme in English is such that it reveals what I call the interpersonal key signature of the clause. In Lecture 5, we'll view the whole system of mood and related interpersonal systems of the clause. So this is our first full lecture on the interpersonal system of the clause as a move. The key system here is mood, but the related systems will meet. Diacticity, polarity, mood person or subject person, and so on. In the first segment, we'll review the system of mood, and I'll present an overview of the system, choice by choice. We're now located in the interpersonal column of this function rank matrix at the rank of clause. Again, as I said, the key system is a system of mood. And you can think of this as a grammar of interaction. That part of the grammar that provides us, as speakers and listeners, with the resources for engaging in exchanges where we exchange meanings, moving from one exchange to another in the construction of dialogue. Note that in the textbook, the semantic status of the WH element in table 2.5 is stated as follows. This may be a bit unclear, so you can replace it with the following table. The point is, as we've already seen, that the WH elements in WH interrogatives fuse the interpersonal and the topical aspects of the theme. For example, who woke you up late today? Or why did you wake up late today? Or when did you wake up late? Or how did you wake up? The WH element incorporates the demand for information, that's the interpersonal aspect of the theme, and either a participant or a circumstance, somebody or something. So demand, tell me somebody who, tell me something who, tell me somewhere, where, and so on. So this is a somewhat clearer version in the display. As always, when we navigate our way through the description of the resource of the grammar, we need a map. So let's return to the notion of lexicogrammatical cartography, meaning mapping out the resources of the grammar. So just as when we plan a hike, as in this example, with Ruka Hassan, Michael Halliday, and Kazuhiro Teruya, colleague from CBS, planning a hike on, yes, you're right, Lama Island, we need a map. We need a map of the resources of the grammar or lexicogrammar. And this is the function ranking matrix that we've been looking at. The version here is a less schematic version than the one I've used for the cover slide of each segment. But again, we have the same location as I just indicated, interpersonal column, clause rank. And the key system is system of mood, and then there are associated systems of modality, polarity, modal assessment, vocative. And the structures consists of mood plus residue, with the mood consisting of subject and finite and possibly mood adjunct, and the residue of predicator, complement, circumstantial adjunct. And there may be mood tag. It's very warm in here, isn't it? There may be comment adjunct. Frankly, in frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And vocatives. My dear, in frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. The structural patterns then are a bit more detailed, bit more complex than the thematic structure of the clause, theme plus reme. Now we'll refer to this interpersonal structure of the clause either simply as interpersonal structure or modal structure. We'll be concerned with the systems in the cell interpersonal clause. So the systems of mood, modal assessment, and so on. And we can view these in an index of the systems. So this is just a schematic representation of the systems, color-coded according to the different regions that they're concerned with. So the textual system of theme, etc., interpersonal system of mood, etc., and in the final functional view of the clause, the experiential system of transitivity we'll get to in a couple of weeks' time. But our focus now will be on the interpersonal. We move from the textual, and I'll build up the core systems of the interpersonal grammar step by step. This is a core system, mood type, and subject person. But let me develop them, or present the description system by system. All clauses that are major free clauses choose for mood type. In other words, all clauses that function as a move in the interaction construction of dialogue. A choice in mood type, either indicative or imperative. Now structurally, the difference is indicative clauses have a mood element, and it consists of subject plus finite, or finite plus subject in either sequence. That's what the dot mean. They're not sequenced at this stage because we don't know yet. In general, imperative clauses haven't got a mood element. So this is a structural difference between the two in English. As you'll see when we have an opportunity for comparison, Chinese clauses may have a subject and it may be present in indicative clause, imperative clauses. It's not required, as we already saw at the beginning of this semester. But there is no finite element in Chinese, and there is no mood element. Semantically, indicative means exchange of information, either giving or demanding. And imperative means exchange of goods and services, typically a demand for goods and services, so a command. Indicative could be either a demand or an offer or a gift, either a statement or a question. Now, both these options can be further elaborated. In other words, we can look at more delicate or more detailed choices. If we choose indicative, then it will open up other options. One is a choice between declarative and interrogative. Declarative clauses have the sequence of subject before finite. It is rather than is it. You are rather than are you. Interrogative clauses contrast with this, but there is no common structure to all interrogatives. It depends on the particular type of interrogative. And we've already met them, the two types, when we looked at the nature of the unmarked choice of theme. Declaratives, these are gifts of information, statements. Interrogatives, these are demands for information, questions. But with interrogatives, there is one basic distinction. Distinction has to do with what kind of information is being demanded. What's the point of interrogation? Either the polarity, is it yes or no? Yes, no interrogative. Or a participant or a circumstance, a double H interrogative. If it's a demand for the specification of the polarity, then the finite comes before the subject, as we've seen. Is it rather than it is? The finite is that element which carries the polarity. So if you have it before the subject, that's a clear indication that this is a clause demanding information about the polarity. Is it? Isn't it? WH interrogative, in contrast, the point of interrogation, the demand is for the nature identity of a participant or a circumstance. The sense of something, someone, somewhere, somewhen, somehow, plus demand for information. Interestingly, in Chinese, the same items can serve both as indefinites and as interrogatives. Now, structurally, this means you have present in the clause a WH element. So it says plus WH, and that always comes before the finite. Well, there are kinds of questions where it isn't thematized, but this is typically the case. Semantically, then, both are demands for information, but the yes-no is a demand about the polarity, positive or negative. The WH is a demand of some aspect of the content, more specifically a participant or a circumstance. At the same time, all indicative clauses also make a choice in what we'll call diacticity, not just indicative mood type, but also diacticity. Diacticity has to do with the nature of the finite. How is a proposition being negotiated by the clause related to the here and now, the reality of speaking, either through time, temporal, in which case the finite is temporal, past, present, future, or through modality, some assessment of modality relative to the reality of speaking, probability, usuality, and so on, in which case the finite is a modal auxiliary. May, might, can, could, should, must, ought to, and a few others. So structurally, the realization of temporal versus modal has to do with the nature of the finite. What kind of finite verb serves as a finite? Semantically, this is a question of how is the proposition being negotiated through time or modality relative to the here and now, the reality of speaking. That's the nature of the finite. But whether the clause is indicative or imperative, there's also a system where we choose the nature of the subject person. Traditionally, this is described as first, second, third person, and then singular, plural. But actually, a more insightful, a more accurate description is the basic distinction is a subject person interactant, somebody with a speech role, or non-interactant? Non-interactant corresponds to the traditional notion of third person. He, she, it, they, pronominally. So subject is third person. Non-interactant is in other words, traditional notion of third person. Interactant is traditional notion of second or first person, first or second person. But in English, it leads to three-way choice. Speaker, I will, I could, I did. Speaker plus, that means speaker plus others. We have, we will, we are. Where the we doesn't specify whether the addressee is included or not. In some languages, the speaker plus leads to further choice, inclusive, exclusive. And then the addressee. And then the subject is you. So I, we, you. These are the interactant persons. Speaker and speaker plus, in traditional grammar, these are first person. And addressee, in traditional grammar terminology, is second person. But in modern English, this is the way that the choices are organized. Interactant then means part of the club defined by the interaction. Non-interactant means outside that club, as it were. Now, we've seen lots of examples of texts that are indicative, declarative, because we worked with a number of monologic written texts in examining theme selections. We've looked at this in relation to methods of development that are typical of written monologic texts, declarative. But texts can also be, even if they're monologic, primarily something other than declarative. And typically they're imperative. Let me give you an example of a text that is primarily imperative. You'll find this somewhere in the hallways of PolyU. Energy saving tips. And when you see tips, you might suspect, aha, this is a text likely to have a number of imperative choices, and that's exactly what you find. Save energy, save. Predicator as theme, imperative. Use a high fan speed rather than lowering the temperature setting, etc. Use, again imperative clause. And you can check that if you hesitate. You can see that in fact the subject person is addressee. Save energy, won't you? Use a high fan speed, won't you? Then dress smart and as light as possible during summer. Dress, won't you? Again imperative clause. So all these are instructions or tips, and these are kinds of commands. Switch off lights and air conditioning, etc. Switch, again imperative. Switch off, won't you? Affix, save energy stickers, dear. Affix, won't you? Imperative. Switch off the screen. Unplug water dispensers and printers. The object above is a printer, not a water dispenser. Unplug, won't you? Again imperative. And after install, finally read more from the sources. So like other instructional texts and regular text, you can expect to find that the mood type is mostly imperative. Save, use, dress, switch, affix, switch, unplug, install, read. So in the system in the northwest corner, the choice is imperative typically here rather than indicative. Consequently, when we examine text, we can look at them in terms of what choices are made clause by clause, just as we did when we looked at the thematic analysis of text. Again, in your typical monologic text, most clauses will be declarative, but as I've just illustrated, certain clauses can be imperative. And if you have dialogic text, you're likely to have to and fro. Maybe declarative, interrogative, declarative, imperative, declarative, and so on. Another system that is parallel with mood type is a system of polarity. We've already met this. It's a basic choice between positive and negative. Here, positive is unmarked, negative is marked. And this is reflected in the structure. So while we don't have to have a special specifier of positive, there is always one of negative. The adjunct not. But this may be fused, and often is, with a finite in English. This choice in polarity between positive and negative is often the system on which discourses, dialogues pivot. And let me illustrate this. Let me illustrate this from a bit of dramatic dialogue where the interactants negotiate the polarity, positive or negative. A constructed example would simply be they have, positive, they haven't, or they have not, negative. Again, as you can see, it's a negative that requires a special realization or expression. Positive doesn't. So structurally, the negative is marked, the positive is unmarked. But that significantly is associated with the probability of selection. So the probability that a clause will be positive is about 0.9 and that it will be negative 0.1. meaning when you analyze text, 90% of the clauses are likely to be positive, 10% negative. And it stands to reason then, it's a perfectly functional principle, that's the least common one that will have a special marker, not the most common one. Let's now look at an example in negotiation or dialogue revolving around positive negative from Harold Pinter's play The Birthday Party. And we look at the contrast in two speaker selections just between positive and negative. So this is a bit of dialogue between Stanley and Meg. Meg is a landlady of a boarding house, a seaside resort in Britain, in England, and Stanley is the one boarder. We've already met Meg's husband, Pete. We had that in the last segment of lecture 4. But now Stanley and Meg are together, and the exchange starts with Stanley. He initiates a statement. They've got a wheelbarrow in the van. Meg disagrees and says, no, they haven't. And Stanley retorts, yes, they have. Meg could have continued saying, no, they haven't. But she changes. She opens up another negotiation, say, you're a liar. So Stanley could have replied, I'm not. Yes, you are, and so on. So what's going on here? Well, it's just the mood element, subject and finite. This carries the negotiation around the subject, positive, negative, in terms of time, in this case. They have. No, they haven't. With yes as textual theme and they as topical theme. Yes, they have. With yes as textual theme, continuative, and they as topical theme. And the contrast is then they have, they haven't, they have. And as I said, Meg could have continued, but she chooses to initiate another proposition. You're a liar. Again, the mood element carries the polarity. You are positive as opposed to you aren't. So this is really like a tennis match, we could say. Stanley starts. Meg bats back. No, they haven't. They have. You're a liar. And it all revolves around the mood element. And that is, of course, why Stanley, initiating the exchange, needs a full clause. They got a wheelbarrow in the van. But when Meg disagrees, all she needs is the mood element. She can leave out the rest, got a wheelbarrow in the van, the residue. Why? Well, because that's continuous. What she wants to contrast is they have versus they haven't. Not got a wheelbarrow in the van. She wants to contrast that element which carries the point of the argument, the number of the argument, they, and the dimension through which they're arguing, have, haven't, with the polarity. No, they haven't. Yes, they have. And then over to Meg again, you're a liar. So the negotiation of polarity, positive, negative, is carried by the mood element. Going back to one of our box diagrams, where we show all the three metafunctional strands of the clause, thematic, modal, and transitivity, we're now focused precisely on the mood element. They've got a wheelbarrow in that van. Again, that's the element that is crucial in the negotiation of polarity. And as I already said, once the proposition has been initiated, that part which is continuous can be left out. They've what? Got a wheelbarrow in the van? No, they haven't. Yes, they have. And they ellipt or leave out the residue. Got a wheelbarrow in a van. Then when Meg wants to initiate another proposition, another exchange around another proposition, she has to have a full clause again. You're a liar. And as I said, Stanley could say, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. Am I? Leaving out the residue. The little passage I've looked at here, this one, comes from a longer segment, our logic segment between Stanley and Meg. Stanley starts, Meg, do you know what? What? Have you heard the latest? No, I bet you have. I haven't. Shall I tell you? What latest? You haven't heard? You haven't heard it? No. They're coming today. They're coming in a van. Who? And do you know what they've got in that van? What? They've got a wheelbarrow in that van. They haven't. Oh, yes, they have. You're a liar. So now you see how this passage, the exchange that I started to focus on, fits in. And Stanley continues. A big wheelbarrow, and when the van stops, they wheel it out, and they wheel it up the garden path, and they knock at the front door. Meg again disagrees. They don't. They're looking for someone. Again she disagrees. They're not. They're looking for someone, a certain person. Meg. No, they're not. See the same principle. The first time the proposition is introduced, in this case a positive polarity, mood plus residue, and then when Meg wants to contradict, just mood element ellipting the residue. They don't. They're not. They're not. So in these two passages as well, same pattern, and in the last one. Now we'll consider this scene from two different productions, is to give you a sense of the choices that are made when somebody takes a script, maybe for a play, for a stage play, teleplay, film play, movie script, and then in constructing the performance, various people are obviously involved, there are a number of choices. So it's always interesting to compare different versions of one of the same script, play, film play, teleplay, and so on. Just a little bit of background if you're interested. As I mentioned before, Harold Pinter is one of the most highly regarded playwrights of the second half of the 20th century, British. He started with his plays in the late 1950s, and by 2005 or 2006, something around there, he got the Nobel Prize for Literature. The Birthday Party was first performed in 1957 and is the second full-length play by Pinter, first published in London, Encore Publisher, etc. In the setting of a rundown seaside boarding house, a little birthday party is turned into a nightmare when two sinister strangers arrive unexpectedly. The play has been classified as a comedy of menace, characterized by Pinteresque elements such as ambiguous identity, confusions in time and place, and dark political symbolism. The Birthday Party is about Stanley Webber, an erstwhile piano player who lives in a rundown boarding house run by Meg and P.T. Bowles. So we met all three now in the play, and this is an English seaside town, probably on the south coast, not far from London. Two sinister strangers, Goldberg and McCann, arrive looking for him, supposedly on his birthday, and turn his apparently innocuous birthday party, organized by Meg, into a nightmare. There have been at least two film versions, one from 1968, theatrical release, William Friedkin, and you'll be surprised if you know of his classic horror film, The Exorcist, that he's actually the same director of this Pinter play as of this classic horror film, The Exorcist, from a few years later, the early 70s. And then a BBC play, which we'll also have a little look at. Now, one reason Pinter is interesting is when you look at passages of dialogue, it seems very everyday. It doesn't seem particularly dramatic in a sense. but the dramatic quality builds up out of apparently everyday exchanges. And this is one reason that makes him interesting from the point of view of the analysis based on the interpersonal systems of the lexicograph of English, and also, of course, the semantics and the tenor relationships that are enacted through the selections in mood, speech function, etc. We'll first look at this scene that I've told you about in Friedkin's 1968 film. So just have a look at how the choices are made to enact this in the performance.
Did you pay a visit this morning?
Meg, do you know what?
What?
Have you heard the latest?
No,
I bet you have.
I haven't.
Shall I tell you?
Oh,
They're coming today.
who?
They're coming in a van.
Who?
Do you know what they've got in that van?
What?
They've got a wheelbarrow in that van.
They haven't.
Oh, yes, they have.
You're a liar.
A big wheelbarrow. When the van stops, they wheel it out. They wheel it up the garden path. And then they knock at the front door.
They don't.
They're looking for someone.
They're not.
They're looking for someone. A certain person.
No, they're not.
Shall I tell you who they're looking for?
No.
You don't want me to tell you.
You're a liar. Hello, Mr. Bowes, it's come. Oh, yes, just come. What?
So this is the 1968 William Friedkin version. Now take a look at the version from a few years later, 1987, a BBC play. Same play, different director, different actors.
Meg, you know what?
What?
Have you heard the latest?
No,
I bet you have.
I haven't.
Shall I tell you?
What latest?
You haven't heard it?
No.
They're coming today. They're coming in a van.
Who?
You know what they've got in that van?
What?
They've got a wheelbarrow in that van.
They haven't.
Oh, yes, they have.
You're a liar.
A big wheelbarrow, and when the van stops, they wheel it out, and then they wheel it up the garden path, and then they knock at the front door.
They don't.
They're looking for someone.
They're not.
They're looking for someone, a certain person.
No, they're not.
Shall I tell you who they're looking for?
No!
You don't want me to tell you?
You're a liar!
Now you have the two versions to compare, and you can play them again and again. It's interesting to see the different decisions that the director and the actors have made. Now, I prepared a document where you can look at longer passages, move by move, right? And I've just given you illustration of two here. They're coming in a van. They're coming in a van. So 68, 87. Who? And you can use this to get a sense of the creative choices made in each version. Note that in Friedkin's version, Meg stands up and they use a classic circular movement around the table to represent or enact an antagonistic relationship. In the 87 version, BBC version, Meg remains sitting, but Stanley gets up and he circles around her, a semicircle around her. You can take a systematic look at this from the document that I'll make sure you have access to in your folders. This is the end of section 1 of lecture 5, but as an appendix, let me give you one more example, which I'll just walk through very quickly. These are exchanges from a film called Waterloo Bridge from the early 40s. And the reason I've chosen this is those of you who know Chinese, you can look at the Chinese translation, just to have a little bit of a comparison of interpersonal patterns in English and in Chinese. This is the book, Waterloo Bridge. And you have the original English dialogue to the left and the Chinese translation to the right. And this is between Roy and Myra. So for example, Roy says, shall I carry that? That's a yes-no interrogative. And even though in principle it realizes a question, it serves as an offer. And Myra says, no, I only drop it in emergency. Roy, shall I? Shall I carry that? And response, no, I only drop it in emergencies. This is just as in the previous examples, an exchange, initiation, and response. And then that is picked up in the next exchange. Roy says, well, I hope I'll be around the next time it happens. And Myra responds, it isn't very likely, is it? Supplying us nicely with a mood tag, a question tag, it isn't, is it? With reversal of polarity, which is the default unmarked pattern. It isn't, is it? So as we've seen before, sequences of exchanges form dialogue. You can look at it in the Chinese version. Those of you who can read Chinese. You are, aren't you? And this is the Chinese analog of a mood tag, question tag in English, but you see it's a particle. It isn't, is it? And again, you can check out the translation into Chinese. Here's another example. You're rather matter of fact, aren't you? Again, with a mood tag, yes, the question tag. You are, aren't you? Mood element. And the mood element is, as it were, mirrored in the mood tag. So this passage from the dialogue consists of a number of exchanges, sequence of exchanges. And as we've seen before, that's how dialogues develop, exchange by exchange.
Thank you very much. I hope you get back safe and sound.
Thank you.
Here, take this.
Your good luck charm?
Perhaps it'll bring you luck. I hope it does.
Oh, look here, I can't take it. It means so much to you.
You'd better have it. I was beginning to rely on it too much.
Well, that's wonderfully kind of you.
Olympic Theater, please. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
An appendix example, just to allow you to consider more instances of mood selections and also a brief initial comparison between English and Chinese. Those of you who can read Chinese. This is the end of segment 1, the first overview of the mood system. In segment 2, we'll turn to the modal structure, the interpersonal structure of the clause as a move in dialogic exchanges. Thank you.